Today, we're digging into a story about an idea so powerful it completely changed how we see the world and our place in it. We're talking about Charles Darwin and the incredible journey that led him to a conclusion that honestly still shakes things up today.
So, to really get a sense of how big a deal Darwin's work was, you have to understand his place in history. We're not just talking about another scientist here. He's considered one of the most influential people ever. And the proof? Well, it's literally set in stone in one of the most famous buildings in the world.
Take a look at this. This is Darwin's final resting place, right inside Westminster Abbey. And notice who his neighbor is for eternity, Sir Isaac Newton. That is no accident. This was the highest honor possible, basically saying he was on the same level as the giants of science. I mean, Newton gave us gravity and the laws of the universe, so what on earth did Darwin figure out that was seen as just as big?
And that really is the big question, isn't it? How did a guy who spent his life studying pigeons and worms and barnacles come up with an idea so profound it landed him next to the man who explained gravity? To figure that out, we've got to rewind the clock a bit to the world Darwin was born into.
You know, before Darwin could find the answer, he first had to understand the question. And back in the early 1800s, the single biggest puzzle in all of natural history was something a famous scientist called the mystery of mysteries.
So the accepted view at the time was pretty straightforward. Species were fixed. They were created a certain way, and they just stayed that way. A finch was a finch, a dog was a dog, end of story. But the Earth itself was telling a totally different story. People were digging up fossils of these bizarre extinct creatures. If everything was supposed to be unchanging, well, where did all these new things come from? It was a major head-scratcher.
And this quote from a top scientist of the day, John Herschel, just nails it. He called it that mystery of mysteries. They were looking for a natural law to explain it, not a supernatural one. And it just so happened that a young naturalist, Charles Darwin, was about to board a ship for a trip that would lead him straight to the answer.
After not really loving his time at university, Darwin kind of stumbled into the opportunity of a lifetime. He got the job as the ship's naturalist aboard the HMS Beagle. He had no idea at the time, but this voyage would become his real education, a 5-year global journey that would literally change the course of science.
Just look at the path of this journey. It's incredible. We're talking 5 years, around the world. And Darwin wasn't just sitting on the boat. Most of the time he was on land, exploring, collecting thousands of specimens, and just observing. The entire planet became his personal laboratory.
Now, Darwin didn't set out to create a new theory of everything. He was really more of a geologist and a collector. But like a great detective, he started picking up on clues, little anomalies and patterns in nature that just didn't quite fit with the official story of unchanging life. His first huge clue came from digging in the dirt. In South America, he found fossils of these giant extinct mammals, like the glyptodon, which was basically a car-sized armadillo. And the really weird part? He found these fossils in the exact same places where much smaller, living armadillos were still scurrying around. It really looked like there was a connection between the past and the present, which challenged that whole idea of separate, special creations. This image really captures the spirit of his work, right? He wasn't in some stuffy lab. He was out there, in the thick of it, experiencing everything from massive earthquakes in Chile to the rainforests of Brazil. Every single place he went was like a new chapter in a book he was just learning how to read. And then, of course, we get to the most famous stop of all, the Galápagos Islands. This is where things really started to click. He noticed that the mockingbirds were slightly different from one island to the next, and it was the same with the giant tortoises. Their shells were different shapes depending on which island they lived on. It was like one original species had made its way to the islands and then changed, adapting to each unique little world. This was a huge red flag for the idea of fixed species. So, Darwin gets back to England, his head just buzzing with all these observations and questions. But he didn't just rush out and publish his ideas. Oh no. Instead, he spent the next 2 decades, 20 years, quietly working, collecting more evidence, and building an airtight case for his theory. And to give you a little peek inside the mind of the man, get this, before he proposed to his cousin, Emma, he actually made a pro-con list about marriage. On the marry side, you've got logical things like constant companion, but also the hilarious, better than a dog anyhow. And on the not marry side, terrible loss of time and less money for books. It just shows you this was a guy who analyzed everything. Okay, this right here might be one of the most important doodles in history. In 1837, Darwin sketched this little tree in his notebook. It was his way of visualizing this radical new idea that all life was connected, branching off from common ancestors like a tree. This completely shattered the old idea of a ladder of life, with humans sitting at the top. And above this game-changing sketch, he wrote just two perfect little words: I think.
So Darwin had the what, the idea that species change over time, but he was missing the how. What was the engine driving all this change? The answer, funnily enough, came from an essay he was reading for fun by an economist named Thomas Malthus. Malthus argued that populations grow faster than their food supply, which leads to a constant struggle for existence. And for Darwin, reading that was a total eureka moment.
He realized that this struggle Malthus was talking about wasn't just for people. It was happening all over nature. And in that constant competition, any living thing that happened to have some small advantage, some favorable variation, would have a better chance of surviving and having kids. He came up with a name for this mechanism: natural selection.
And the logic of it is just so simple and elegant. It breaks down into 4 basic steps. 1. Organisms make more offspring than can possibly survive. 2. All those offspring have slight variations. They're not identical copies. 3. Because of that, there's a constant struggle for existence, for resources. And 4. The individuals with the variations that give them an edge are more likely to survive, reproduce, and pass those winning traits on. Over millions of years, that process can create entirely new species. So Darwin has his complete theory, but he hesitated. For 2 whole decades, he kept gathering more and more evidence because he knew exactly how much of a firestorm his ideas were going to cause in Victorian England.
So what finally lit a fire under him after 20 years? A letter. It came from another naturalist, Alfred Russel Wallace, who had been working in Southeast Asia and had, completely on his own, come up with the exact same idea of natural selection. That forced Darwin's hand. In 1859, he finally published On the Origin of Species, and it was an absolute bombshell. It sold out on the very first day.
Now, throughout the entire book, Darwin was very careful to avoid the most explosive topic of all, us, human evolution. But he left this one little cryptic hint right at the end. Light will be thrown on the origin of man. The implication was crystal clear. Humans weren't some special creation. We were part of the same tree of life as everything else. And the reaction was immediate, and it was intense. A lot of the scientific community was blown away by the mountain of evidence Darwin presented, but the general public was mostly just shocked. This idea that humans were descended from animal ancestors, well, that was deeply unsettling. And of course, it led to all those famous cartoons of Darwin with the body of an ape. But you see, for Darwin, his theory wasn't some depressing demotion for humanity. It was the opposite. It was a beautiful revelation about how we're connected to every living thing. He ended his book with this incredible passage, talking about the grandeur in this view of life, this amazing process that has produced endless forms most beautiful and most wonderful. And that brings us right back to Westminster Abbey. Darwin earned his spot next to Newton because he too gave us a fundamental law of the universe of life. He solved that mystery of mysteries and gave all of modern biology its foundation. His idea is still shaping everything from how we develop medicines to how we understand ourselves. The real question that leaves us with is, how does this powerful idea continue to change our world today?